listening to The Doctor's Corner with Dr. Kline and Janelle Elgoway.
Good evening and welcome to the Doctor's Corner on Call 360 Network. I'm your host, Janelle Elgoway, along with Dr. Kline. Welcome, Dr. Kline. How are you this evening?
I'm just dandy.
Good. Well, tonight, if you have questions or comments for Dr. Kline on anything related to health or wellness, or anything you haven't felt comfortable enough to ask your personal doctor and want answers to, please call in and ask Dr. Kline. You can call in at 415-915-2291. You can also chat live with our audience on the YouTube channel Conspiracies Against Wellness livestream. So tonight, Dr. Kline and I will focus on your questions. So again, the phone lines are open now, and if you'd like to call in, please do so at 415-915-2291. So, Dr. Kline, is there anything new or major that's been happening within the health community in the past week that we all need to know about?
We're getting some very positive feedback from the FDA. They basically are saying, we're your friends, and be sure to tell us. So they have an open line where you can make comments, which maybe Janelle can provide a link later on. Mm-hmm. And they really want to hear from pain patients. They are just sitting there waiting. I heard from another government official, how do you get things done in the government? They be sure to put your comments on the comment lines when they open them up for hearing what you have to say. He said they all listen and read everything. So get on the line, just tell your story briefly. It doesn't have to be extensive. Just say, I have this particular disease. I was doing fine on medicines. Now I'm cut off my medicines. People are establishing limits. This is what the FDA wants to hear, because the CDC has no right to even whisper about putting limits on prescription drugs. It is not their job, and it is not in their mission statement. When federal agencies are set up, they're given missions, and they do what is on the mission. You know, if you're in the agriculture department, your mission is not to build the rockets. And if you're in the CDC, your mission is not to distribute medical advice to the country. They have been wrong. They have overstepped their bounds. And the people that are going to pick up the slack is the FDA. They are the ones who make decisions and make rules about all prescription drugs. So it's very, very important that everybody get on this comment line and make comments. So.
Okay. Well, we already have a caller. Caller from area code 253. What's your name and what's your question for Dr. Kline?
Hi, this is Maria. I'm from Washington State.
Hi, Maria.
Hi. Hi, Janelle. Hi, Dr. Kline.
Hi, yeah.
What's your question?
Hi. Mm-hmm. So I know that this is a question you're hearing all the time, and I finally said something to my pain doctor last week because they have been force tapering me, and I finally got up the gusto to say something back to them about the CDC guidelines, because they keep telling me that they are tapering me due to the CDC guidelines. And so I finally said, well, it was my understanding that these guidelines are guidelines and that they don't apply to chronic pain patients. And they told me that they get memos in the mail every week that tell them that they need to either force or to taper their patients off of opioids, and that's just what they have to do, that they don't have any choice.
Oh, gee, you know, down through the ages, doctors have been asked to do all kinds of terrible things, and they have two choices. They can do the terrible things, or they can stand up for their 2,000-year-old profession.
Yeah.
So, now, if you really want to get aggressive, you go online and get a big copy machine and make a copy of the CDC guidelines. There's 50 pages. Okay?
Right.
And you take them in there and you say, who is sending you these memos? I want to talk to them.
Right.
And find they may be getting memos from their bosses. You know, the problem is when doctors sign up and get a paycheck, they got to do what the boss says. So then you can take these guidelines up to the boss and say, where is it saying here? You're harming me. Do you know what harm means in the practice of medicine? It means malpractice. And you tell the bosses that. And you cannot make up phony rules that harm people and then expect to get away with it. You know, suppose I was in my office and I said, oh, you know, I don't think I should treat these sore throats with penicillin, these strep throats. You know, how about these herbs? I'll just give you this garlic bag to put around your neck. So the person gets kidney disease from the strep throat or rheumatic heart disease, which is why we treat strep throats, by the way, is not for the strep throat, it's to prevent the complications. So then I go before the board and I say, well, you know, I just made this up. How far do you think that would get before a jury? We need to really fight back. This is a horrible, horrible thing. It's the worst thing I've seen in my 4 decades of practicing. And I'm sorry, I will not defend any physician who says, oh, you're telling me to do something unethical? No problem, because you're paying me. Give me a break.
Yeah,
So,
they just keep reiterating the guidelines over and over and over and over again, and that's every single time I go in. Every month I go in, my blood pressure's gone up, and I've lost 70 pounds over the last 11 months because I'm in pain, and they keep saying, we're sorry and we don't want to do this to you, but the guidelines say we have to do it. So
no, yeah, that's why you know, go down to Kinko's and you
said,
drag them in there in a big notebook. Here's 50 pages. Where is it say that?
Yep. So I have one more question for you. Yeah. I have a pain pump, and I was wondering, and they haven't said anything about this, but I was wondering if you knew, as far as the MAE goes, on the daily MAE, do they include the medication that's in your pain pump, or is that just oral and the physical medications that you take yourself?
Oh, that's a good one. I do not have an answer. I don't know.
Yeah, I was wondering if anybody
because
had
it's
an answer to that
it's
question.
delivered in a different way. The MME system, by the way, is very inaccurate. Very inaccurate.
Right. Yeah.
And it's very dangerous. You know, okay.
Yeah.
Thank you, Maria.
Okay, well, those were my 2 questions. You bet. Thank you. And thank you both for everything that you do for chronic pain patients, for your advocacy and everything, because it's really, really, really well appreciated.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Okay. All right.
Have a good one. Okay, we have another caller. Caller from area code 262. What's your name and what's your question for Dr. Kline?
Good evening, Janelle and Dr. Kline. I'm F1 Rocket Engine.
Hi.
I sound off at Twitter sometimes. And I first heard about the FDA as a youngster, and in relation to what the proper dose of vitamins were. And then I haven't heard about them for 50 years. Until now, while we're begging them to recover pain medicine, strong pain medicine. Dr. Kline, I don't know if it's off topic too much, but what are some of the famous landmarks of the FDA over the years?
I really don't know.
I understand. I haven't heard much about them. I don't know what sort of.
The FDA is basically in charge of all drugs, whether they're across the counter or prescription. That's their job. That's their mission, is to approve drugs, write guidelines for the use of the drugs. They have written guidelines for opiates that you basically can titrate to any dose that works. It is legal for me in the United States to prescribe any level, any dose of any opiate approved by the FDA, as long as I'm carefully titrating, which means to increase it slowly. So it's FDA's job to control these drugs.
I see. They don't know what they're great. Sorry, Janelle, go ahead.
Nope, I was just going to ask if you had anything else. Go ahead.
if they had made some great decisions, some great positive inputs, and some great progress in our health in regards to something they did, in regards to health. But you said once, Dr. Kline, that states. I wish I understood this better. How do originally states oversaw their doctors along with the state's medical board? Now we're concerned about the government now sort of messing with that. How do individual states? I mean, why would individual states? I know each state has their own constitution, and how did it used to be? How did states manage their doctors?
They've always managed them the same way. They set up licensing boards, and they license you to practice medicine. And if you're not doing a good job, they take your license away. That's the way it's always been in each state.
Yeah, and some states are different from others.
Yeah, each state sets up their boards the way they want.
Their boards. All right. I understand. Thanks, everybody.
You're
Good
welcome.
night.
And also, if people have questions that they feel are anonymous, it's okay not to provide your name.
Yeah, absolutely. Nobody ever has to give me their name, or just make up a name too. So, all right. For new news that we are talking about, what else has been going on that you can talk about?
Well, I think people should know what's going on with the persecution of doctors. I'm a doctor, and anytime people say, oh, yeah, right, persecution of doctors, all a bunch of crooks. That's what my grandfather told me when I told him I was going to medical school. He said, a bunch of crooks. But, it's important to look at each case. There's a doctor by the name of Dr. Leslie Pompey up in Monroe, Michigan, who was targeted by the local narcotics people who basically run around all the time with nothing else to do. So they go after doctors. He was identified by a computer that said he was prescribing more medicine than anybody in the state. So that makes him a criminal?
Right, because maybe he has patients that need it, right?
Well, and then they use this statistic. You see, these people are playing doctor, and they said, well, he's he had 1,200,000 pills prescribed. Mm-hmm. So what I did is I took the average prescription and presumed that somebody was taking it for a whole year, and I divided it into 1.2 million and ended up with 400 patients. Okay. 400 patients is nothing for any practice, much less a pain practice. I mean, most practices have panels, we call it, of 4,000 or 5,000 people. 400 people.
Wow.
So then they, without charges, without going to court, then they went for the civil forfeiture.
Okay, and what is that exactly?
Okay, civil forfeiture allows governments, federal and state governments, to take your property if they think you're a big pin criminal. So when they're raiding drug pins down in Florida, they rush in and take their fancy boats and cars, and they're allowed to do that. Also, if you're out fishing on a lake and you don't have a license, the state can take your fishing equipment, even your truck or car. So what they did to Dr. Pompey, he's been practicing 31 years, so he got a little nest egg going of $1 million in bank accounts, and they just went and took it. Then they took his home. And then they sent undercover agents to his home and took $20,000 worth of his wife's jewelry. So now the case drags on. It's been a year, no charges. There are no charges levied against this doctor by the Monroe authorities. Mm-hmm. But they have all this money they've taken from him, which they get to keep.
Right.
This is a weird, very nefarious. I mean, why not go after the doctors?
Right.
I mean, if I was running a district attorney's office, hey, I'd be out there trying to get all of them, just round up their cars and take them down to the police station and keep the money. So he would not play ball. He is a pretty good lawyer. And he said, I'm not going to plea bargain. Take me to court. Then they get nervous because they figure most doctors will plea then they get to chalk it up as another, conviction.
Mm-hmm.
But he said, no, I'm not going to do that. So all of a sudden they get nervous and they say, well, gee whiz, even though we haven't been able to levy actually any real charges in over a year, and they took all his medical records, just went and took them out in boxes.
Wow.
Those records also belong to the patients. But no, this is such a heinous crime. My God, what's going to happen with all these opioids out there? We're just going to have hordes of dope fiends, ranging the streets. This is what people believe. And so they're so scared, they don't mind when the police do this. Thank God the police are doing their job.
Mm-hmm.
But Dr. Pompey had a lot of patients, and they took his license away. So guess what? None of those patients now have a doctor. In one case, and maybe even this case, the hospital finds out the names of all the patients in the practice that's been raided, and they red flag them all. Now you're red flagged, you'll never get another opiate the rest of your life. You're on the computers now as a dope seeker, drug seeker, whatever the name they come up with. So they label all the patients in the practice. So now you got all these, he may have a couple thousand patients. And, his practice is closed. So all the people who maybe don't have pain disease are out with no doctor. They don't make any provision. They just go in there and shut the practice down. Too bad. Too bad, you citizens who no longer have any health care. But it's such a serious, heinous crime, being the biggest prescriber in the state. I've read a lot of stuff here, and I can't find anything that really they are bringing forth to suggest this guy had any serious problems. Also, what they do is they send in undercover agents,
Mm-hmm.
and they pretend like they're patients, and they try to get the physicians to feel bad for them. They'll send in women to male physicians and vice versa. Oh, doctor, I've had this back pain. I just need a week or two of medicine. Then they nail the doctor.
Wow.
Right? As prescribing. And now guess what? Now the doctor is a drug trafficker.
Well, and isn't the DEA, I know in the past, a long time ago, they would work with doctors and let them know, well, for example, if a doctor had a patient that was selling prescriptions, that he was prescribing to and didn't know of it, the DEA would come to the doctor and they'd work together. Now it's like they're focusing and targeting the doctor. Why has that changed?
It's because of the leadership. Under the Obama administration, Obama told the DEA to back off, deal with illegal drugs, not with legal drugs and doctors. Those should be state items. If the DEA wants to intercept fentanyl coming in from foreign countries, that's their job. Mm-hmm. That's what they should be doing. But the DEA wants a lot of arrests, because the more arrests, then they can go to Congress and say, look at this crime that we're stopping. We need more money. The DEA has had its budget doubled in the last 5 years. That's not something that happens on a regular basis in a government agency.
Well, it's all that doctor's money that they're collecting.
Well, they get all that, and the agents are paid $100,000 a year after you've worked there for 5 years. Then they get all this money. They sit around their offices. They're in the diversion unit, so they don't have to deal with real criminals with guns. Mm-hmm. And they just go around hassling doctors to see if they can rack up some pleas. But the key is they're looking for pleas. So the physicians need to go to trial, because that's what they don't want to do, especially the DEA, because then they'll have to talk about their undercover agents. You can't hide an undercover agent in a trial.
We have a question from YouTube. Can Dr. Kline tell me if there are particular opioids that better manage patients who are slow or fast metabolizers?
Yeah, good question. No, you just got to give more. If your bathtub's got a leak in it, you just got to put more water in it. Okay. And that's what happens when people are fast metabolizers. You just need higher milligram doses. You may not be getting a higher blood level, but you need higher milligrams.
Okay.
And I've said before, there's a couple other drugs that we do that one. One is vancomycin, which is an antibiotic. We don't care how many milligrams of vancomycin you give, as long as the blood level is okay. Right. And the same for Coumadin when we're anticoagulating people. We don't care how many milligrams of Coumadin you're getting, as long as your blood thinning is just right. Same thing. If you give somebody 50 milligrams of oxycodone and they're dozing off and falling down on the floor, they're getting too much. Mm-hmm. If they're not showing any side effects and they're getting pain relief, it doesn't matter how many milligrams you're putting in their mouth. It depends on each person's metabolism, and the metabolism for this group of drugs is so wide. This is the reason the FDA, when it says what's the maximum dose, it said there isn't any. I mean, it depends on the person's absorption, the person's metabolism, and the person's individual reaction to the various medicines, various opiates. So just go to the point that it works. Pretty much the same as Coumadin. Coumadin does not have an upper dose. It's go to the point that the blood thinning is just right. So it's the same kind of model. But doctors are not used to drugs without limits. And of course, they've been convinced that high doses cause overdose and addiction, which is not true.
Another question from YouTube from Laura Polk. When exactly did they start implementing these CDC guidelines and tapering?
CDC guidelines came out 2 years ago, March the 15th, 2016. And in that 2 years, the fallout has been astronomical.
Mm-hmm. Christine Horn from YouTube asks, how can CDC claim 90 MMEs?
They made it up.
Okay.
They used what was called a contextual evidence review, which is a euphemism for we just gave our opinions and sat around a room and made it up.
How did they get doctors, though, to agree? Or I mean, wouldn't a doctor know by reading these guidelines before they put them out and saying, like, we don't agree with these? Or did they not even ask doctors?
They didn't even ask. We always believed the CDC, and they tricked us. They tricked us by using their good offices. We always thought the CDC, when they're warning of an epidemic of Zika virus or influenza, they knew what they were doing, and we listened. So they tricked us because they've got nothing to do with opioids or opiates or narcotics. Matter of fact, if I don't know if they put anything on there, but when the guidelines came out, I quickly went to their website. Guess how much information is on there about opiates?
How much?
That they have written a 50-page guideline for. There was nothing.
Wow.
Zero.
So, all right, the CDC, though, is all about stats, information research. What's going on? Why isn't there any information or research going on here?
Well, they still collect data. Their job is to be data collectors, to watch for epidemics. Epidemic is a sudden rise in the number of cases with a potential for death or serious harm. So they keep track of the number of cases of influenza, and they start increasing, and then they put out a warning. Okay, they're increasing, they're coming. So now we're in an epidemic, and you read that in the news. In December, we're having an epidemic. Get out there and get your shots. The numbers for the overdose deaths increased by 1 per 100,000 over each year, and that was declared an epidemic. And it was declared an epidemic by CDC workers like Leonard Pelosi, who his name is on most all of the CDC hysterical articles. This is an epidemic. This is a crisis. It's 1 person per year, 1 person per 100,000 people per year increase. It did not start in 1999. 1999 was the first year CDC kept records. I have charts that go back to 1970. Lo and behold, every year, the overdose death rate went up slightly. So it's been going on since 1970.
Who's above the CDC? Who's watching over them to make sure that they're not, changing the records or doing anything?
They are, I believe, under DHSS. I'm not sure what the chain of command is. They do have a scientific advisory board. That's kind of like the board of any business or whatever. And these people need to get out there and listen to what's going on. The CDC has made a tragic error And they admitted themselves it was not based on fact. It was based on a group of people they brought in as consultants that were on a secret list that operated in secret, and they made up these facts.
Is that public knowledge? Like, how where is that?
Yeah, it is. It's you can go to if you go online, you can Google the House Oversight Committee letter to Frieden, December 2015. You should be able to get it.
Okay. Okay, so 3 people in the last week contacted me, and they were called by their doctors, and they all had false positives, or, well, they came up positive for something in their urine. You, by the way, were my guardian angel when I went through that last year. Can you share how patients should respond to this information, like the language they should use when talking with their doctor, or what research should they be doing? Should they just give up? Because they all said, well, I should give up. And I'm like, no, don't. Hang on. Listen to the show this week coming up, and I'll ask Dr. Kline, and he'll help you with that.
Everybody needs a lawyer. And if you don't have a lawyer, find a lawyer and have the lawyer write you a will. Everybody needs a will. And that way you get a relationship going with the lawyer. And then you have the lawyer call over there for information only and say what's going on. You're claiming a lab test is going to put my patient or my client into a category where the rest of her life she will never, ever receive a pain medicine pill. Because that's what happens when you get red flagged.
Right.
And these tests are inaccurate. You can challenge the tests, and they probably don't want to yield because it's much easier to put you on a red flag list. Then they won't get into trouble with the principal. Mm-hmm. So they'll screw you, put you on a list that'll ruin you. I mean, if you go in with a broken leg or something, they're going to pull up your records, go, no, drug taker, no opiates for them. Bad enough that most people aren't getting opiates anyway. But when bad things happen to you, you need to fight back. And the law is the best way, and lawyers don't like to get involved. But there's nothing wrong with a lawyer making a phone call to get information. And let me tell you something, that works.
Yeah.
And a lawyer probably charge you $200 or $250 to make a phone call. That's fine.
Well, I was going to say, though, what if people can't afford that?
If you can't afford that, then you need to go to the Board of Registration in Medicine, file a complaint, look up the Board of Registration on your Google. It'll have a little button there to file complaints and say, I have been now labeled the rest of my life as a person who's not going to receive opiates because of a lab test that was done in Dr. Jones' office, and name the physician. And I can assure you that it is a false positive or false negative test, depending on how they're interpreting it. So that's the other way to fight back, is to go to the Board of Registration in Medicine. You've been harmed. Yeah. It's negligence when a doctor takes a false lab study and then does something, treats you or doesn't treat you. If I got a false lab test that somebody had leukemia and I started pouring toxic drugs into their bloodstream, then I would be a candidate for a lawsuit. We don't make 100% decisions based on lab studies. It's our responsibility as doctors to verify that the lab study is correct. So the doctors who are telling you that you've got a negative or false positive and you don't believe it to be correct are engaging in negligent malpractice. It is their job to be sure those lab studies are valid.
Well, and if they, okay, so there's 2 tests, correct? Like once when you go in originally and they do a quick TAB test, and then there's another test called a gas test, correct? And why are there 2 different tests, and is that to make sure? And how accurate is that one then too?
One's a screening test. That's the one they do in the office and make a lot of money on. And the gas chromatography is what we call the gold standard. It is very accurate, but very expensive. I've heard $1,600 or something to get a test. So, I mean, you could verify a false positive or false negative with gas chromatography tests, which you could request. And if they refuse, just go to the Board of Registration in Medicine. This is not proper practice of medicine. And people need to have their feet held to the fire because there's a severe consequence. If you are labeled a drug seeker, you're not going to ever get pain relief. My God, what a sentence that is.
No, I couldn't even imagine it. And I mean, you even get flagged. I know I had to have some type of red flag or something like that on my records because when I had to go to the ER for a real emergency, but because I was on all of these medications because of my health issues, you know, they start like doing different things. And then my primary care would ask me questions. Why are they doing that? Even in the ERs, if you just go there for a real emergency that has nothing to do with pain medication or needing pain medication, like say I can't breathe.
Yeah, no, it's the worst thing in this country to be on opioids, because the word opioid has now been turned into the devil pill.
Yeah, it's like
the
a witch
heroin pill.
Yeah,
it's, you know, I always say that the use of the word witch hunt is overdone, you know, as a metaphor, but it's no longer a metaphor. No. This is the real thing.
The modern day one.
Modern, you know, the computer, you might as well just wear an A around your neck on a string, you know. Addict.
We have a question from YouTube. Stacy Fields asks, why do doctors not want to take patients from doctors who have been rated by the DEA?
Because the patients are all tainted by the devil. I mean, they're all possessed by the devil. They wouldn't have been going to the pain doctor in the first place, and they're probably radioactive. And you just need to stay away from them, you know. God forbid you should bring them into your practice. Can you imagine what would happen? Good heavens, they would contaminate everybody in the waiting room.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the view. It's terrible.
So, you know, I mean, a lot of people have been asking me a lot lately about hope. They are losing hope because, and this is patients, because they're hearing all this negative stuff. What hope do we have? You know, they're afraid.
I used to always tell my patients, no matter what you have, you can hope and cope at the same time. And a lot of people don't think you can. But the biggest hope is what's going on in Canada. The British, now in Canada, they have provinces, 11 or 12 of them. Each province has its own medical board called a college. It is basically like a state medical board. And they determine what goes on in the entire province. There's also a national policy, but the states or the provinces really take precedent. Colleges have been giving people a hard time, just like the boards here. Self-righteous night riders zooming around and catching those evil, possessed people on opioids. So the doctors in Canada have been having a hard time as well. But in British Columbia, the pain patients got together, Pain One, I think it called, organized a group and got doctors involved, patients and doctors holding hands, got the doctors involved, and they got the things reversed. British Columbia is now in the process of writing new guidelines which will basically destroy the CDC guidelines and will destroy the David Jurek guidelines for Canada that he wrote, and will put it back on an even keel. They will require that practices not discharge people because they're on opiates, and that they are going to be required to treat everyone to a full titrated dose. It's a huge reversal of the wildfire that was set by the CDC, the physicians for responsible prescribing, the guidelines that suddenly reversed their stance in Canada, written by 4 people who had absolute control over the guidelines and their writing.
Wow, I didn't realize that it was that bad up there too. So what is that going to do for the United States, doctors and patients? Will we follow that?
Well, it's as soon as the college gets off its duff and writes these things. See, they're not in effect yet, but they are going to be in effect. And once that happens, once the CDC falsehoods are finally repudiated, it's going to improve things all over. It's going to take the wind out of the sails of the DEA. I mean, if everybody is being treated, you see, the assumption is that if you treat too much, you're going to create addiction, and addiction leads to overdose deaths. And that's not true.
Yeah, they kind of like really went, in the left field with that one, because this is chronic pain patients, people that have been, sick for a very long time and on these medications. We're not going to overdose. We're not going to become an addict suddenly. So why are they focusing so hard on doctors and patients?
Because they're afraid. Yeah, they're afraid. They're afraid of the infiltrating dope fiend mentality, immorality, possessed by the devil, that these got to be the world's worst drugs. And it goes all the way back to 1912 with these, proclamations of the horrors of opiates. And it's just a bad thing. It's been wrong.
Yeah.
We've had it wrong, all this time. We've had it wrong about people with AIDS. We've had it wrong about people in the gay and lesbian community. We've had it wrong about minority groups. We've had it wrong about American Indians. The puritanical culture that believes in purity and abstinence is still running the show.
A question from YouTube. Stacy asks, my symptoms are spiraling out of control since I'm always chasing pain. Is there anything I can do about that? Because she has been lowered below the 90 MME. And
well, I read an interesting tweet the other day. A person who was suicidal called the suicide line at the VA. And the poor woman at the VA on the suicide hotline said, what you need is more medicine. And she said, you're not the only one calling in, let me tell you. And she said, I'm just so sorry, there's nothing I can do. Suicide prevention for people in pain is pain medicine. Pain medicine is suicide prevention. Mm-hmm. So when spiraling pain, there's nothing you can do. You need more medicine. You need to go into the doctor's office and say, I have this spiraling discomfort, and then always attach a functional loss that leaves me lying in bed. I can't get up and make coffee. I can't take care of my kids. I can't have sex. I can't get in a car and go to the store. Do you understand that, doctor? And start raising your voice. Do you understand that? And, if they become insulted or something, too bad, because if you just sit in there and they keep reducing your medicines, what are you going to do? You need to speak up as an adult. The doctors are adults. They put on their pants one leg at a time in the morning, and you need to speak to them adult to adult. What are you doing to me?
Yeah. Well, this is the other thing I see this as. I feel like there's a whole bunch of new fronts that we're going to have to change. For example, first, and let me know what you think. What about doctors? Are doctors being trained and taught correctly first in medical school and then going up forward about pain medication, all of that? Do they need to learn?
No, they need to learn. They need to have some refresher courses not written by the CDC. Right. The CDC is writing these refresher courses and trying to convince some medical schools to oh my God, pain doesn't really exist. Just deal with it. Take a little Tai Chi, but for God's sake, don't give these drugs because they cause overdose deaths. And in fact, in talking to now 3 veteran pain management doctors, all 3 of which have had more than 30 years experience, none of them have ever seen an overdose death.
So what does that mean?
Never. What that means is the CDC is taking data from the streets, people dropping dead in the streets and having autopsies, gathering up the data. So basically they have data on the addiction community who's not receiving any medical care out in the streets with no outreach, no community support. They die. And then they do these partial autopsies, which are very, very inaccurate. They do partial blood tests, very inaccurate, draw these conclusions. And the conclusions are what? That it's increasing every year. Okay. And what are we going to do about it? We're going to do these things about it in the general population. No. If you're going to do something, you do it in the addiction community where you did the original study. If I do a study on diseases in cats, I don't assume that I can apply this to diseases in dogs. That's a fundamental principle in science. When you do a study on a particular population and the results come back, you can only apply the results to that population. Mm-hmm. If you do a study in diabetics, you can apply those results to diabetics, not to people with high blood pressure. So the CDC made a huge scientific blunder, and they know very well they did it, by taking data from street addictions and then dropping the word street and saying overdose, and then watching some articles take place over the country of kids who were prescribed opiates by their doctor and died of a heroin overdose. And that can occur, and it's the doctor's fault, but for a different reason. The doctor failed to ask the patient if they've ever had any opiates. The only way you can addict is to have the gene and take an opiate for the very first time. At that point, you will have an explosion of a euphoric effect as the warning sign that you now have real type B serious addiction disease. So if doctors aren't asking that question, then they are negligent.
Shelly Beans from YouTube asked, does Dr. Kline have any suggestions for when seeing a new pain management doctor for the first time?
I would write up your history, like an article with little bullet points and 2 or 3 lines each. Now, I was in good health until 1900, and then here I had an MRI. I went to this doctor and I got this. This worked. This improved my function. And you give them a list ahead of time before you go in. You send it in ahead of time, and in that list, you're going to say, here are the things that did not work. Make a list of all the things that did not work. Make a list of all the things that worked and how well they worked. Make a list of drugs you've taken that had side effects, like these horrible Neurontin and Lyrica drugs, by the way, not approved by the FDA for use in general pain. Mm-hmm. Make a list of all those things on 1 or 2 pages, but the important thing is send it in ahead of time, because that way it can get into your chart. The doctor will have a chance to read it ahead of time instead of during the busy office, and then the physician can make notes on what you've submitted. I think that's a big step that will help. And also list your real diseases, so you're not just in there, quote, whining about pain. You're in there because you have a painful disease, and it's causing you this discomfort, and it's causing you the loss of these functions. So it's kind of like doing your homework and, doing a theme paper, what I did during the summer, and send it in to the doc. I think that would be a big help.
Laura Polk asks, can you talk about injections like ESIs, facet, RFAs, SI joint, etc., when to say no to them, doctors, to get those?
I heard some advice from somebody that does a lot of injections, and he said, if the first injection doesn't work, no more injections. Mm-hmm. In other words, it can actually be used as a diagnostic tool for sacroiliac joint dysfunction, which is frequently missed. Mm-hmm. Because if you suddenly relieve the pain with an injection, then you got this particular diagnosis. If they want to do more injections, I think it should be with the counsel of an endocrinologist to watch out for your adrenal gland. We had a pain patient whose son was on these injections and went to the emergency room and nearly died because he went into shock. And that's what happens when you suppress your adrenal gland. Your adrenal gland is your protection against serious physical harm. It keeps your blood pressure going, It keeps your body working while you're dealing with a broken leg or an automobile accident. But if that doesn't come into play, you're in deep doo-doo. And you can suppress your adrenal gland by giving steroids. So they squirt these steroids in the injections. How long do they last? Nobody knows. Probably 6 weeks, which is our cutoff for that you may be getting into trouble. So I think after one injection, any more injections, you should be consulting an endocrinologist, and they can keep an eye on your adrenal glands.
Okay. We got a caller from area code 319. What's your name and what's your question for Dr. Kline?
Hi, my name's Howard Tekoff, and I've been a huge follower of yours and also Janelle's for quite some time. But my question is, do you think that there might be some financial backing, or influence to on the CDC by PROP? In other words, PROP is definitely making a lot of money off of their addiction centers and
medications.
I'm just wondering if it's pressure.
No, I've heard that before. Dr. Kline actually got out of the business of the rehab centers. No, I think they believe this. People believe all sorts of odd things. This is an extremist group. Because not only do they not believe in pain medicine, they don't believe in pain. It's, you read articles by people in PROP, and it's real obvious that they think the pain is not as bad as people are portraying it. That's an extremist position. How do they know? How do they know somebody isn't having pain? If you're writhing on the floor, they think you're faking. And if you're sitting there real calm, they think you're faking. So it kind of sounds like they think you're faking all the time. It is not a very nice way to think of other people. If they're in a medical profession and they don't understand people in pain, they need to get another job.
Yes, they do. I agree with that. Yes. And sometimes I wish that, that they would experience our pain for at least an hour or two and see what we're going through. Sometimes I would even suggest maybe up to a day or two that they could, if that was possible to be able to do, I think they would suddenly would change their minds on that.
Yep, I agree.
Howard, did you have any other questions?
No, I don't think so.
Okay. Well, thank you for calling in. Have a great night.
You too.
Yep. Aaron Sells from YouTube asks, and I'm going to probably destroy how to say this, but does Dr. Kline know about chronic CAUDA, C-A-U-D-A, equina syndrome with neurogenic bladder and bowel? None of my doctors take it seriously.
Well, here's what you do. You go to Wikipedia, which actually is a very good source, because they will give references too. Wikipedia gives references. So you can actually click on the reference and make a copy of that. So you take the little packet and you send it in ahead of the visit to the doctor and let the physician at the end of the day read it. Don't make them read it while you're there because they don't have time. And you just put a little post-it on it, say FYI, and educate the doctor so they can do it without losing face, at the end of the day in the back room with nobody looking. They can read up on it and learn. Doctors are quick studies. They just need the information. And if you supplement the Wikipedia with a couple of articles, that you can get it in their references, that would be great. So like one Wikipedia and 2 references would be perfect.
Okay. I had a question this weekend. Somebody wanted me to ask you, they are on MS Contin, the ER, and then they have an IR, and they feel like their MS, they said that the generic, they could tell a difference or something. They just said that it doesn't work as well as other pain medications. Is that true? Is there something of why? They wanted to understand that a little bit more.
Well, we're actually having a huge problem with variations in medications. A lot of difficulty with oxycodone, and I've had a couple of patients complaining about MS Contin. You see, it's hard to tell if you've been on the same manufacturer. It's the manufacturer. It's on the label. It's the manufacturer of the drug. This is not what we don't prescribe the manufacturer. That's up to the pharmacist. So a one that we're having a lot of trouble with for oxycodone is KVK Tech, and it'll be on the bottle.
Okay.
Now, the problem is if you're taking this stuff and you're having side effects and it's not working, you don't know it until you switch to another brand. So you tell your pharmacist that, gee, it seems like this MS Contin, or the short acting is not working as well. Has there been a change in the manufacturer? And you can actually look back on your bottles. That's a good reason to save your empty bottles. But the pharmacist will have that and say, is this a different manufacturer? See, what people don't realize is that, there's a brand name drug, they have a patent and they make the drug. And then there's a generic drug that's licensed by the first drug company, but they can sell it cheaper. However, there's a lot of generic manufacturers, not just one. So there's generic oxycodone that has, 4 or 5 different manufacturers, and we're having a terrible time with some patients where it's not effective. And then they switch to another brand. Ye gods, they're getting twice the effects. Had some bizarre side effects, vision side effects. One woman was vomiting every morning, which all stopped. So this is an issue that you deal with your pharmacist.
Okay. Let's even look at other stuff besides pain medication. Is this across the board with medications? Did they have this problem?
It's looking to be. I was always naive. I always figured that, gee whiz, the initial drug company gives the formula. That's what they do when it goes generic. They're forced to give their formula. So here's how you make it, 1 teaspoon of this and a pinch of this. And they're supposed to make it exactly the same way. But, they start cutting corners in order to sell the drug. I don't know. This is what the FDA is doing. The FDA watches out for this stuff. So if you have a drug that suddenly you've got a bunch of side effects that you didn't have before, you can file a complaint with the FDA online. Unfortunately, it's so long and laborious, but it's important to do because other people are going to be taking these tainted drugs or improperly manufactured drugs. But always report it to the FDA. It doesn't you don't have to be sure, and talk it over with your pharmacist.
Pain medication. Is there any long-term studies where it shows that it's bad for you, like that you will die from it or have major complications down the road from taking it for long periods of time?
No. As a matter of fact, all the studies done long-term, which CDC claims don't exist, and I'm afraid that's an untruth. There's a lot of studies that exist. The 2010 Cochrane Review, the famous Cochrane Reviews done by Noble, N-O-B-L-E, showed that long-term effects side effects were almost zero. There were really no problems at all taking this wonderful medicine that God gave us from this plant.
Right.
And no addictions reported. I keep searching for evidence that addictions occur in people on chronic pain medicine. I can't find any. And I can't find any doctors who've noticed it. And I don't think it's going to occur because if you do not have the genetics for hardcore type B opiate addiction, you're not going to get it. As a matter of fact, if you take 100 people and give them all marijuana, they're all going to get high. If you take 100 people and you give them opiates, only one will get high, and that's the one with the disease. Everybody else, oh, this is great, I feel relaxed. That's not getting high. People who have smoked weed know what getting high is. And people who've taken opiates who are not addicted know very well you're not getting a high from that. So people running around trying to get highs, yes.
Right.
Hardcore opiate addicts, not the general population.
Well, President Trump said last year that we are in a national emergency because of the opioid crisis or opioid epidemic. And I know he said that they would give out, I think it was between $5 or $8 billion towards stuff for research and whatever whatever prop and all of them needed money to be able to do more research and stuff like that. But I know that there's been a lot of money given in the past for more research and stuff like that. Where's this research that they're supposed to be using this money for?
I haven't read very much. A lot of the research done by government agencies are surveys, and they have these large tables. 13-year-old Hispanic girls in L.A. prefer this particular drug or smoke cigarettes, and then they publish these gigantic tables. I have no idea what you're supposed to do with them. I read one government report had 300 tables.
Wow.
And made no conclusion. They just do this year after year.
So there's no point to it then.
there's no point that I can see as a practicing physician.
Taxpayer money then, right?
It's a horrible waste of taxpayer money. And there's some real simple things you can do. You can have public health nurses do outreach in addiction communities. You can set up confidential question and answer lines with addicted people, with doctors and nurses. You can put ambu bags, which are little bags you can breathe for somebody when their breathing stops. You can teach working as teams, never addict alone. Leave people alone. Let them do what they're doing,
right?
Because it's not harming anyone. The dope fiends do not cause serious crime. Only people who drink alcohol cause serious crime.
Right. A question from Rocket on YouTube. Dr. Kline, is there a chart of your levels of addictions?
Of year levels? By year, you mean?
No. I don't know if he means your levels. Like, I don't know if it meant YOUR, he said. Is there a chart of your levels of addictions?
Yeah, don't quite understand. You mean types of addiction or addiction occurrence?
I think addiction occurrence, I think you meant.
Okay. The biggest mistake made by the hysteria coming out of the CDC claiming that there's been more overdose deaths, which is true, very small number of overdose deaths, increasing only in the addiction community in heroin users, not in the general population. But what's not true is that corresponds to increased addictions. No government report that I've seen proves there's been more addictions. This Sam Quinones, if I'm pronouncing his name right, that wrote this book on I don't know, dope fiends and stuff like that. I saw him appear before a congressional Senate review, and he said addictions have been increasing since 1999. Remember, that's the year the data first started. That's not true. Nobody said addictions are increasing. So people need to relax. We've had the same problem with type B addiction disease ever since 1909, I just found out, when they passed the first restrictive opioid law, even before the Harrison Act. And once the government made this stuff illegal, the people with the true disease will find the substances.
Right. Yeah, and if it's not one thing, they're going to go somewhere else.
They're going to go somewhere else, right. And then what they do is they start finding more and more dangerous things, and then they kill themselves.
Right.
So they're actually killing themselves by making pharmacological mistakes, which we can teach them not to do. We can warn them ahead of time about using high-dose opioids with high-dose benzodiazepines, because that does increase the deaths in the addiction community. So guess what? So that has been unscientifically transferred now to state monitoring computers, so that anybody's taking these two drugs together in the general population is being labeled as a potential overdose death by the APRIS company, APPRISS, their new NARC plan that they're selling to all the states.
Okay.
So now you're going to be labeled as a potential overdose. You think that's going to be, when the emergency room sees that, you think they're going to prescribe you opiates?
No.
See, again, taking wrong information from the wrong population. But back to the addicted folks, yeah, you can teach them, hey, don't take this many milligrams of you're going to get yourself into trouble. And the average addict, by the way, takes 6 drugs. So when they die, they've got 6 drugs on board. Who knows what's caused the death? And 14%, that's a lot of addicted folks are committing suicide.
Rocket from YouTube says, Janelle, announce your intention to have a show with a panel of doctors and addicts. And actually, Dr. Kline was the one that came up with it. So would you like to talk about it?
Well, we have four folks who are type B, serious addiction folks who are currently clean. Or currently, I like to use the word remission. Some of them don't like to do that, but this is a lifelong disease. You've got a genetic brain disorder, and you can bring it under control. And a lot of people bring it under control with their wits, which I commend them for. But it's always there. You're always in remission, and I think most addicted folks know that. So these are 4 people that are willing to talk and answer questions about what it's like to have this disease. And it's time that we all understand this is a disease, because everybody's afraid they're going to get it. And if you took 1,000 people at the Walmart and gave them all heroin, 1,000 people, give them all heroin, 995 are going to be fine. They're going to enjoy a relaxing effect from the heroin. They're not going to become addicted. 5 people will become addicted if they are already not addicted.
Well, Dr. Kline, did you have any last words for this evening?
We need to stop being afraid.
Yeah.
There's nothing bad that's going to happen. If doctors warn all their young patients, have you ever had an opiate before? And then tell them, hey, if you go on a magic carpet ride, I want a phone call immediately. Immediately, day or night. This is an emergency disease. You can stop the addiction. There will be no more new cases of addiction. People with opiate addiction are not dangerous. They can work. They can function. The ones that can't function have a more serious disease, but none of them are dangerous. The crimes committed by people with opiate addiction are theft, stealing from stores, manipulating doctors, manipulating family. There's almost no serious crime from opiate addiction, and people need to stop being afraid. They need to be more afraid of people who take cocaine on a regular basis or alcohol.
Okay.
So, good night, Janelle, and thank you for having me.
Well, thank you, and have a great night, Dr. Kline.
Bye-bye.
Tomorrow, guest Erin Elizabeth will join us from HealthNet News. We are going to focus on her personal journey with Lyme disease, remission, and how she's been able to remain in remission, and the tireless and amazing activism work she does, and so much more. Well, thank you so much for joining us, Call Nation, on another Tuesday evening at the Doctor's Corner. I'm Janelle Ogaway, signing off until tomorrow evening. Have a good night.
You've been listening to The Doctor's Corner with Dr. Kline and Janelle Ogaway. Copyright 2018 by EXG LLC. All rights reserved.